Will you please just shut up already? The usual simmering whispers of the Gryffindor Slytherin potions class as they queued outside of their classroom was interrupted by an unexpected explosion. The unexpectedness of this explosion was heightened by the fact that this particular ingredient had not been volatile for quite some time. The ingredient in mind was Harry Potter, and his newfound cheerfulness and ability to remain calm that had been going over the last 6 months, roughly since the death of a certain evil overlord, was unsettling to say the least. Most of the school attributed his happiness to the absence of threats on his life, though the observant ones had noticed his change in attitude had occurred a few weeks before Voldemort's actual destruction. Most of the school also agreed that the way that Harry now greeted everything with unbridled enthusiasm was, for lack of a better word, creepy. He even kept his smile on in potions class. Some people had even noticed that his smile actually widened, improbably, in potions class, but they did not dare speculate on the cause of this. Clearly, Harry had gone mad. So it was relief then when Harry finally lost his mysteriously even temper, and several of the Slytherins actually applauded at this. The Gryffindors were hard-pressed not to show their pleasure in the same way, but felt it could not be particularly supportive to cheer on a fight between two of their own. Ron and Harry were standing in the middle of the hallway, and the large explosion had been Harry yelling. After all this time of being perfectly happy with absolutely nothing, Harry had turned to his best friend and shouted loud enough to echo throughout the entire hallway. The echo had not quite faded when Harry continued, this time at a more sedate volume. For the love of Merlin, Ron, how can you keep saying those things? I mean, it's bad enough that the warden changed your mind about any of it, but to say the same stuff every day for 7 years and not want to even rip out your own tongue is something I truly can't comprehend. The simmering whispers had lost their heat the moment a fight had begun to brew, and all the students were pressing forward eagerly so that they could catch every single word. So far, though seemingly very exciting, they had no idea what this argument was even about. They hoped Ron would enlighten them when he opened his own mouth to respond, but they were to be disappointed, as Ron did not understand any better than they did. "What?" Ron asked, gaping a little. He shot a desperate look at Hermione, who schooled her features to appear somewhat sympathetic, and shrugged. She knew exactly what Harry meant, but decided not to get involved if she couldn't help it. Ron never listened to a word she ever said, so it would be interesting to see if Harry could get through to him. Harry rolled his eyes at Ron and muttered something that sounded like, "as eloquent as ever," but it couldn't have possibly been, because Harry would never say something like that. He folded his arms against his chest and heaved a sigh before speaking loud enough to address John. "I get that you're still clinging to these stupid principles, Ron. Though I don't know why." Ron opened his mouth to speak, but Harry held up a hand to detain him and raised his voice a little. "And I don't want to get it. I don't want to hear anything about it. I don't want to be anywhere near you if you ever broach this subject again. I'm sick of it, Ron. I'm sick of it." Ron looked a little more than offended. But Harry," he whined, "we used to spend hours talking about it together." "And then I grew up," Harry interrupted, "and realized that I didn't want to gossip about people that I don't even know anything about. It's a shame you never grasped that particular thought yourself." The Slytherins were practically rubbing their hands with glee. They still didn't really understand what this conversation was about, but they enjoyed the put-downs regardless. The Gryffindors thought it might have dawned on them that this was about, but most were sure they must be wrong. It would be a strange thing to argue about after all, but they couldn't remember Harry doing anything remotely resembling gossiping about anything else. Their suspicions were confirmed a moment later. "People, don't you know that you couldn't possibly need to know about the Slytherins, Harry, that isn't already obvious? And what could you possibly want to know?" At this question, the Slytherins lost much of their glee, as they felt themselves propelled into a discussion that must be taking place in a parallel universe. Surely Ron had misunderstood, and Harry would correct him now. Anything before I shoot my mouth off with accusations, Ron, Harry exclaimed, actually stomping his foot on the ground in frustration. I don't want to know anything about people before I'd stop dedicating the alarm ban and calling the sort of vile names you put on them all the time. Just because someone was sorted into in a house does not give you the automatic right to say what you like about them. Ron looked flabbergasted, not to mention red in his face, knowing that the subjects of this conversation were clearly listening. All eyes swiveled to him, curiously, looking for his response. I know that, Harry, he pleaded. But it's a different story with the Slytherins. There's nothing wrong with being a Hufflepuff or a Ravenclaw, but you know that you can't trust the Slytherin as far as you can throw them. The eyes swiveled back to Harry, and Hermione suddenly had the bizarre sense of watching a tennis match. She wondered if any of the other Muggleborns felt the same way, but thought it inappropriate to begin asking. I trusted a Slytherin with my life 8 months ago, and I can tell you right now that it was no mistake, Harry stated flatly. Hermione noted that this match wasn't really fair. Harry seemed to be better equipped for it, and Ron was clumsily attempting to volley with little success. She mused that this was as though he accidentally bought a badminton racket to the court instead. Ron sputtered in response, completely unable to think of a reply that would negate Harry's point. Yeah, well, he started before getting interrupted again. And the Slytherins standing around us right now fought beside us in the war. And I don't know how far you reckon you could throw them, Ron, but I promise you that you need not to trust them a heck of a lot more than you do than when you had to win that final battle. And we did win it together. As Ron floundered again, Hermione decided it was more as though he had forgotten the racket entirely and brought a fork instead. Refusing to accept his loss, Ron spoke up again. Are you telling me that we ought to trust a bunch of slimy snakes just because they had hexes behind our backs when we got our backs turned? Ron, they are not a bunch of slimy snakes, Harry began, looking as though he might implode at full circle this argument had taken. They are untrustworthy, backstabbing, cold, slimy snakes, Harry, and you know it, Ron shouted. The Slytherins didn't know how to handle this distributor, or how to take Harry's defense. We've been over this wrong. They aren't untrustworthy, not just in the word either, but with other stuff. They haven't stabbed any of us in the backs lately, and as not far as I could take as well. Unless you can count that toadstone that mysteriously found its way into your potion last session, Ron interrupted, dismayed to see that it brought a smile to Harry's face. A stupid prank does not count as backstabbing. Besides, we do not do the exact same things, you know, and we did the exact same thing back, Harry countered, and Ron struggled to concede the point. I guess, but you can't deny that they're all heartless bastards. I mean, look at Malfoy. Harry roared in answer this time, obviously enraged by this suggestion. If I even hear you suggest that Slytherins are incapable of emotions even one more time, I know that firsthand that they are perfectly able to. Harry trailed off, suddenly realizing that what he was saying, but the damage had already been done. The silence was now heavy, and if there was a clumsy house elf who had dropped a pin somewhere in the castle, it was clear that this crowd would have been able to hear it. After several very uncomfortable moments, Ron finally shouted the silence. First hand, mate? He asked timidly, as though the answer to that question was something that would kill him. Harry did not respond verbally, but he blushed so strongly that his entire face momentarily served as a beacon in the otherwise dark corridor. That was an answer enough. Magic. The simmering hisses of other whispers returned, and this time with a stronger flame and fuel to them, as speculation over who exactly had been giving Harry first-hand experience of Slytherin's warmth hardness had spread. Even Ron and Hermione had descended into frantic whispers as they attempted to work out to the best of their ability to deal with this information. Only Harry and Draco Malfoy were silent, and they met each other's eyes over the hubbub. Harry winced and looked away, but Draco was grinning victoriously. He had been quite looking forward to this day. His smirk was spotted by Blaise Zabini, who had turned to him to ask who he thought this mystery Slytherin might be, and his shout managed to capture the focus of everyone around them. The clamor produced a little bit of a ripple effect, and soon everybody was staring in shock at Draco, who was peening under the gaze of so many eyes. Is it you? Are you dating him, or are you guys just sleeping together? When did it start? Is he any good in the sack? Harry was shrinking with every single question asked, despite the discrepancy at which Draco was handling him. That is, Draco merely smiled enigmatically, and occasionally tapped the side of his nose to indicate that it was a secret. And at the last question, Draco burst out laughing, and Harry actually sank to the floor, red beat to the roots of his hair. And what led this inappropriate line of questioning? Snape's silky voice asked, his dark cloak billowing as he arrived at the scene. Quite unable to contain her excitement, Daphne Greengrass hollered, "We just found out that Potter's been dating Draco, and he has feelings for him." "Is that so?" Snape queried, eyes scanning the vicinity until they rested upon where Harry was crouched on the floor miserably, clutching his hair and staring at his knees. "And which of the two riches informed you of this?" he continued, slowly silking through the crowd, delighting in the way that they parted seamlessly for him. Neither, sir," Daphne admitted, thinking about it. "Harry confessed that he knows that Slytherins have feelings firsthand, and so we just figured," she trailed off, feeling foolish under the amused stare of their teacher. "You figured that he must be dating a Slytherin, and the Slytherin could be no other than Draco Malfoy, his schoolboy rival?" "Cleverly deduced, Mrs." Daphne interrupted him, instantly regretting what she had done before. The words spilled from her mouth. "But he blushed, sire, when the Weasley asked him about it. We can't tell that he's dating someone," she appealed, speaking so quickly, as though to make up for the fact that the words left her mouth at all. "Indeed," Snape said, inclining his head slightly. He looked up and met his eyes, silently pleading with him to end this, but Snape was not of the disposition to do so. "So far, I believe that you made the correct judgment, that he was dating Mr. Malfoy. But what that appears to be is founded on faulty logic," he said. Daphne and several of her supporters, and those who wanted to find out who Harry had been really dating, which is pretty much everybody but Harry himself, sighed a breath of relief that she would go unpunished for the interruption, and that the topic would be pursued. "Mr. Malfoy, have you been involved with an intimate relationship with Mr. Potter?" Snape asked calmly, his voice covering Harry's groan, when he realized that Snape was not going to let this go, and that it had been begun. "No, sir," Draco replied cheerfully, rolling his eyes at the gasps of surprise. They had honestly believed he had been going out with Harry. The fools! "Are you aware of a Slytherin with whom Mr. Potter has been intimate with?" Snape continued. Draco was smirking widely at this vein of investigation and nodded slowly. "Why, yes, sire," he managed, barely unable to contain his laughter. "And would you care to divulge this name so that this discussion could be done with me, and we could begin with our potions lesson?" he suggested silkily, his eyes glinting wickedly. "No, sire," Draco answered, pressing his lips together after he had been asked to control his mirth. The spectators gaped at his shameless impertinence directed at Snape, of all people. Drake's head would surely roll for this. "And why not?" Snape questioned, his breath and his voice barely over a whisper, and all the more dangerous for it. "Well, honestly, sire, Potter's a scrawny little thing, but his boyfriend would make sure that I couldn't move for months if I said anything about him with, you know, if I didn't say it without his permission. Harry's groan was very audible this time, and elicited some laughter. Snape's cool smile was uniquely wide as he appeared to be giving this statement some thought. Very well, he said. I shall leave it to Mr. Potter to announce with whom he has been conducting a relationship. He moved closely to Harry and reached out a hand, offering to help him up. Harry pushed the hand away and struggled up without it, glaring heatedly at Snape and muttering quite perceptibly, "You bastard."
Magic.
What was that, Mr. Potter? Snape prompted, clearly enjoying Harry's discomfort. I said that you're a bastard, Severus Snape, Harry announced clearly, raising his chin definitely. Putting me in this position. If the air had been thick with tension, then Draco had cheeked his professor. It was solid now with the tension waiting for how he would respond to Harry. And how do you exactly propose to deal with that? Was all he said, his voice low and rumbling, so that every observant person was able to predict what would happen seconds before it did. Like this, Harry stated blandly, before launching himself at Snape and kissing him thoroughly, with full view of his classmates. Even more shockingly, Snape kissed him back with equal enthusiasm, wrapping his arms around Harry to cradle him tenderly. And when they at last broke apart, Harry was clinging to Snape's robe and panting to regain control of his breath. Snape steadied him with a resting hand on the small of his back, and then they turned to address the gaggle of gaping students. Class began 10 minutes ago, so I suggest you all sit yourselves within the next 5 seconds, or risk all having a detention tonight, Snape announced clearly. He held to the back of Harry's robe. Not you, Mr. Potter. I believe you have to serve detention under me for the remainder of the week for finding yourself in that little predicament. Harry blushed and attempted to explain himself, but Snape merely kissed him briefly once more before sweeping off to follow his students. Before taking his place at the beginning of the class, he stalked over to the student who had raised the most inappropriate question and opportunely voiced as soon as he arrived on the scene. Snape kept his eyes trained on Harry, who was attempting rather unsuccessfully, all things considered, to make his way unobtrusively across the classroom to his unusual seat, while he whispered softly in her ear. He knelt down to the student's ear and said, I can assure you, Miss Granger, that he is excellent.